What's going on, everybody? Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and whatever time it is, and welcome back to yet another video with you, man, Immersionaholic. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another faction overview for the Divided to Impera overall mod for Total War Rome 2. Today, we are checking out Colchis, the last of the factions to be overhauled in the 1.2.8 patch for the Divided to Impera mod. So this is going to be really cool. Colchis is basically represented as a Greek colonial city-state right now. So the majority of your population is of Caucasian descent. However, it is basically ruled by a Hellenic elite, and you can get some Hellenic influence and units from that. So let's get into it and talk about what's new for Colchis. Before we talk about the buffs and debuffs, so I will just state a little bit of a disclaimer. This overview is being completed with the revised Grand Campaign beta submod being used. That's because this submod will eventually be added to the main DEI mod. There might be some minor changes here and there. I'm not expecting anything major to happen, but I still think it's more appropriate to use that submod so you guys see what Colchis will be like once that submod is actually added into the main mod. So please do be aware of that. There's only a few differences, but it kind of does guide your early game early on, especially with your diplomacy. But I'll talk more about that once we're actually on the campaign map. So first off, let's talk about your buffs and debuffs. So being part of the Apoikie ton Helenon cultural group, we of course share the colonist buff, which gives you special population technologies. Basically gives you a bunch of tech under the military management tree that allows you to boost your population. Very nice. Then you also have the independence buff, gives you plus 10% melee defense during battles in own or allied territory. That allied territory can be very helpful, so keep that in mind. You might want to try and drag enemy armies into your own or allied lands to help you out there. But for Colchis itself, we get the assimilation buff, which increases happiness from presence of other cultures. This is very nice because you will be encountering a lot of other cultures. There is not all that much territory in the campaign where you see the Caucasian culture being dominant, so that's very nice for you. Then you have the trade crossroads buff, which increases your trade income, which is always very nice, as trade is massively important, especially in the mid to late game. And then the golden legacy debuff, which gives you a major diplomatic penalty with Greek factions, thus not guaranteeing, but is certainly pushing you to be at war with most Greek factions, and it can be a bit of a pain to try and fight. But anyway, that's enough talk now. Let's jump into the Grand Campaign map and talk about the part 1 section of this video, see what's going on for Colchis. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, here we are at the part 1 section of this video. So let's talk about what is cracking for Colchis. We start off with one army, one city, and that therefore means you are a one-hitter quitter. That's right, you're a one-hitter quitter. You lose fastest and you're knocked out of the game. But you also have a single spy here as well. But this is it. You have nothing else off in the mountains or anything like that. You are very, very small early on. So, what does this mean for your diplomacy? Well, using the Grand Campaign Revised Beta submod, we see what the diplomacy will be for Colchis. So, let's go to diplomacy. And we can see you are actually at war with Trapezos to your south. Trapezos is a Greek faction. They don't have any alliances that we can see. They might have non-aggression pacts, but we can't know that. But they are already at war with you. They hate you, as do most Greek factions. As you see as we scroll up and down here, the majority of the icons that are red belong to Greek factions. The nicest you get, which is yellow, which I think is Bithynia. Nope. They're Dacia Thracians, so never mind even that. Currently, no, they're Caucasian. Sinope. Nope, they still hate you. But anyway, besides this one war declaration, all you have is a trade agreement with the nomadic people known as Syracuse or Syracuse to your north, which is basically in the middle of Scythia over here. And that's it. You have no other trade, no other non-aggression. And so it's kind of forcing you, well, not forcing, well, actually it quite is. It is forcing you to go and deal with Trapezos early on. Before we get to that though, we need to also know that you have the city of Phasis, which is your capital, is a coastal province. Using the submod that I already mentioned, you will have a Hellenic outpost already built. If you like, you can change that to be a Caucasian outpost instead, and you will get more Caucasian units available. I wouldn't do that personally. I would just stick with what you have, because you can still get a bunch of Caucasian units as AOR units. And AOR, the area of recruitment units that is, can be denoted by the black flag in the bottom left corner of the unit cards. So you have 4 AOR units available instantly, which is very cool for you. Phasis is part of the Caucasus, or Caucasian mountain region. So you share it with the Kartli up here, which hold the city of I know I nailed that pronunciation. There's no way I'm pronouncing that, so I'm not going to actually seriously attempt it. But that is the capital of the Caucasian mountain region. And then to the east, you have the city of Gabala, which actually has wood. But that's the only resource in your province, so it's not really all that amazing. I'm not trying to be offensive, by the way. There's no way I can pronounce it. MT Skeda? Skeheda? To me, that almost looks like it says Mountain Skeheda or something because of the MT. But anyway, that's just me being ignorant, not trying to be rude. But yeah, that is your starting province. You have a war declaration with Trapezos, which is, unfortunately for you, actually in another province. The province of Bithynia et Pontus and Pontus. So that is not ideal, because you don't want to immediately be expanding into a new province with new cultures when you don't even have control of your core province. So what I would do personally is I would try and knock out Trapezos very, very quickly, but I would probably either make them a client state so you can recruit some of their units, or you could liberate them and make a military ally out of their nobles. So it's up to you how you approach that, though, but that is basically your starting situation. So your economy, what's going on with that? Well, not really a lot. You have nothing regarding trade at the beginning of the game besides that one agreement, with the nomads to your north, so it's not really much of a difference. However, you are a coastal settlement, so you can get trade with literally anybody that has a coastal settlement anywhere down here. So you're probably going to want to send down a spy or a admiral on a single ship down into Greece early on, so you get some trade with your old Greek colonial homeland, I guess you could say, at least for some of the population here. However, besides that, you basically have the buildings available to you of a Hellenic faction, so you can get a bunch of different docks, you can get the harbor, you can get industrial buildings, you can get stuff like that. All of this despite you actually having the Caucasian culture. Can I show you guys that? Where is it? It should be listed here. Colchis. Yeah, up here in the top left. Culture listed as Caucasian, so you are not Hellenic, even though you have a very strong Hellenic influence from the colonization of this area by the Greeks. So basically, you can have the economy of any Greek, at least any small Greek faction, but it will take you a long time to get there. It really depends on what you do in your early game. If you want to try and solidify your kind of Caucasian region right here, you can, but it still won't give you a lot of money. What I would recommend instead, and what would probably be an easier situation, is you knock out Trapezos very early, get them over and done with it within the first 10 turns at least, then march your army north and take out the Bosporan Kingdom. They often declare war on you anyway. I've had them declare war on me turn 1 for most of my test campaigns as Colchis. I'd recommend you come up here and do the same thing, just wipe them out very quickly. Take Phenogoria, then Tanais to the north, and then you have their capital over here. And if you take their province, that's a very wealthy province, and it's nice and secure, and you're surrounded by nomads that will actually like you a lot for killing the Bosporan Kingdom. So you'll be in a stronger position if you do that, whereas if you stay here and try to take over the Caucasian mountains, you'll be in an okay position, but it's not really all that powerful, and you're not going to have a lot of money rolling in, whereas to the north you have some resources. You can come down into Armenia, but then you have to actually fight Armenia, and then even then after Armenia you have other juggernauts like the Seleucids down here, or you have Media, Parthia, Bactria, the Indians, all of these factions which will be coming your way. So if you want to have a safer campaign, go north, in my opinion. That's just a suggestion though. So that's your economy out of the way. What about your population? Well, because you only have one city, and it is a very small one, your population is pretty friggin' abysmal. You only have 15,000 people in your home city on turn 1. and the majority of them belong to your third tier of social class, which is basically your peasants. It's basically that and your foreigners. You have very little of your first and second tier social class, and because of that, you will not be getting a lot of elite or even medium tier units. One thing I noticed with Colchis compared to other factions, especially those in similar situations, is that Colchis has all of its units, well, not all of it, but all of its decent, like kind of mid-tier units come from the tier 2 social class, which is the Kotoikoi in this case, which is basically your Greek warrior class. And you have hardly any available. On turn 1, you have 1,500. That is nothing. So some of the units include, for example, your Colchian Corsair Axeman. Very valuable unit for you. It's not all that great, but it's fairly cost effective. However, they come from that tier 2 social class, which is really bad for you because you don't have a lot of it. So do you use it on that, or do you use it instead on your cavalry? You have some decent mid-tier cavalry. They're not amazing though. They won't, I mean, they might win you a battle, but you really have to use them very, very good. They're not like heavy, super heavily armored cavalry that will decimate infantry on the charge. But that's that. You do have some other units like your slingers here that come from the third tier social class. Your generals obviously come from the first tier. And then if we go to recruit, because we have an outpost, we can see a bunch of units. Your Colchian scout cav comes from the Liao or Lao social class, which is nice for you. And the majority of your other units here do come from your Lao or your foreigner social class, so between those two. However, you then have units like the light hoplites, which come from your tier 2 social class. Light hoplites can be helpful, but is it really worth using up that precious manpower just to get some very low tier hoplites? I don't think so. And so you're going to be dealing with that as you continue down the building chains and getting better units. These guys, despite them being Colchian, they do come from your tier 2 social class. These guys coming from that Greek warrior class. Your cavalry, we just talked about. What else was there? We then have your thorax units, which will also be coming from that. They're decent units, but you won't be getting them for a while. And even then, you still won't have all that many men to pour into your armies for that. So basically, your population is looking really, really poor. And the issue for you is that it's not going to improve all that much. The Caucasian region is basically limited to this single province that you're in. There'll be a little bit of influence down here, maybe some over here, maybe a tiny bit up here. But basically, once you take your core province that you start in, and start expanding north, south or north, whatever you want to go, you're basically going to have to rely on foreign units to fill up your armies, which is going to be a big issue for you. Your one kind of saving grace you get, though, is that some of the Hellenic cities do provide you with good troops. So, for example, Trapezos at turn 1 has 4,500 Kotoikoi social class units. Although they are a Hellenic faction, so I'm not sure if you will actually keep them. You should, but technically you're Caucasian, which is a different culture, so we'll have to see about that actually. But regardless, you'll still be struggling for population. Basically, throughout the majority of your campaign, you'll have to really rely on AOR, foreigner units, and low tier, basically levy or peasant units to fulfill a lot of your numbers in your armies. So we've covered your economy, we've covered your diplomacy, we've covered your population. Now we just need to cover one last little thing. I have covered the technologies before, by the way, for your population. I'm not going to go over it again, but if you want to look at it, you go to your military technology and you click on management, and then you find them randomly through here. But I've already covered these technologies a bunch before in other overviews, and they're not going to change the entire campaign for you, in my opinion, so I won't go over them now. But what I will go over is your king, because now you actually have a family. This is very different. Before you use this submod, like the Grand Campaign Revised submod, you basically just had a single king and that was it. Whereas now we actually have historical characters. We have your king right here, is 30 years old, basically in the prime. That's very nice, a good age for him, so he can still have kids, but he can also still do well. He then has a sister named Chloe, which is very cool. Never seen someone with like a pretty modern looking name before like that, so that's nice. And then we have Agathon over here, which is your younger brother, 21 years old. So that's really cool. Not really a big change for your gameplay necessarily, but it does add that extra level of immersion, of course, and we're always all about having more immersion here. But that's basically it for the Grand Campaign situation. It's looking pretty dire. It basically depends on the luck of what factions choose to try and declare war on you early on, and how quickly you can get a core province secured. So once again, just to reiterate, in my opinion, it's best to try and take out the Bosporan Kingdom early, ally yourself with the nomads to your north, and all the other nomads all the way up in Whoop Whoop, and try to basically become an isolated kingdom in the north, and then once you're ready, that's when you come back down and expand into Anatolia or go west into Thrace, whatever you like. But you just need breathing room, because right here, you're literally on the edge of the cliffs, and it kind of shows how it is for your campaign, because you're very much on the edge of a lot of powerful factions out here. Currently often become very powerful as well. And so really you basically just have to get out of this position, in my opinion. It's not a good spot to be in. Obviously if you're in a head-to-head campaign you can't leave this, but if you're doing a single player, I would say take over the Bosporan Kingdom and then move your capital as well. Move it to their core province, to their core city, which is right here, just in the fog of war that we can't see. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's pretty much all I have to say about Colchis on the Grand Campaign map. It's definitely changed quite a lot, especially with the new revised submod adding in that declaration of war between you and Trapezos. But anyway, now let's get to the part 2 section of this video, where we'll check out the military of Colchis. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, here we are at the part 2 section of this video. Here to check out the military of Colchis, and here we are with your single cavalry unit that you get for a general's bodyguard. Pretty friggin' impressive unit. First off, they look amazing, as do all of the units in this roster, just about. The entire roster has been overhauled. As you can see, we have a lot of units to cover, so I'm going to try and skim over the lesser important ones. However, your general's bodyguard unit is not one of those units, because it has just insane stats across the board. Melee attack of 10, melee defense of 15. It has a massive, well not massive, but a pretty large shield on it. Pretty massive considering how good it is. And the rest of its stats are just fantastic, going all the way down. You do have another cav unit that has more armor, but none that have your attack and defense combination. So, in my opinion, even though you technically have a better shock cav unit, this is still definitely better, because it can do shock damage and it can fight very well in a very long engagement. You can recruit this as a unit in your armies, and I recommend you try to, because it's just that good. But anyway, let's get started with your skirmishes, and then we'll go through the different battle groups as we do so. So we start off with the runt of the litter, which is your Greek javelinmen. Literally nothing at all good to say about these guys, except that they have 6 javelins that they throw before they die, because they're not going to do anything else for you. They are beyond useless. Don't use them in melee. However, you then have the Colchian skirmishers, which is basically a Colchian version of the same unit. However, these guys do have better stats pretty much across the entire board. Well, definitely across the entire board. But one thing I really want to point out is that they have a good armor-piercing damage. So these guys, after they're done throwing all 6 of their javelins, they will come in with axes, and they'll do pretty decent. They do only have a melee attack of 7, so you could try to get them some experience before they go into melee engagements, but still, that high armor-piercing rating will do very nice to try and negate some of the armor of your heavily armored neighbors. So you might probably want to, well, you probably will want to use these guys over the Greek javelins any day of the week. But then we have even more javelin. We have your generic Greek pelters. Now these guys are the epitome of a generic peltus unit. They're very decent though. Good armor 25, melee attack of 9, defensive 14. These guys are very useful for you, because after they use all of their javelins, they are still a very good swordsman unit that can come in and help you out. These guys do not have much armor-piercing damage at all though, so they are just a generic Greek peltist unit, but they're very helpful and very versatile, so use those in your armies a lot if you can. Next up, we have the Iphicratian early peltist. Now these guys are special, not only because they're basically, no they are quite literally your best javelin unit, but they also carry very long spears. I don't believe those are pikes though. No, they're not pikes. but they are just super long spears. I think those are the kind of spears that are midway in between a standard spear and a Sarissa pike. So they're going to be very useful in defending themselves against cavalry attacks. They only have 15 armor though, but their melee defense of 16 is very respectable. So a very good unit, very helpful for defending itself against cavalry. You probably will need something else to help it survive though. Unless it just gets like very lucky and only encounters like a very low tier cav unit. But that's it, you have 4 units of javelinmen basically. So as you can see, you're pretty javelin focused. But then after that up here, we have 3 units of different types. So initially we have your Colchian hunters, the same thing as your Colchian javelinmen. These guys are very low tier, except they also use axes, so they have good armor penetration of 12, only a melee attack of 5, and a defense of 2. So they are pathetic, and I still wouldn't use them in melee combat, but they do have that armor pen, which is, you know, appreciated. Then you have your Svan archers, though. These guys are your elite tier archers. I say your elite tier archers, as in Colchis, because compared to other elites, they are not very good. They only have a missile damage of 16 and a range of 175. It gets beaten by 2 damage and 10 range on all other elite tier archers. And you will encounter those elite tier archers near you from like the Kate. I believe the Cartley might have 1 unit. And then just other units in the areas, other nations I should say. So they're definitely not bad. They have a good armor of 20. They fight with spears, as you can see, so they can hold their own in a melee engagement for a little while, but they're not going to win you a decisive battle, not in my opinion. But they're helpful. Having a spear with a skirmisher is always going to be appreciated. And then though, we have your single unit of slingers you get access to. There are AOR units in the area available to you, but this is your Colchian slingers, and once again, because we see that they are Colchian, we also see more armor piercing damage come out of these guys. Again, I believe they use axes. Oh no, these aren't axes. These are basically like little mini kind of like folkses, like what the Kate use with their folksmen. So that's cool. I thought that they had axemen. I might have got that wrong earlier, so my apologies for that. Oh no, it's a mixture. Yeah, see, this guy has an axe. Yeah, so it's a mixture of armor penetration weapons. Gosh, I can't talk today, guys. I've been recording a lot today, so please bear with me. Getting a lot of replays done for you all. Now, though, let's talk about your spearmen. So as you can see for your skirmishers, you have a very heavy focus on short-range skirmishing and skirmishes with spears and armor penetration weapons. But anyway, for your spearmen, we have the Colchian Levy Spearman. Not a very good unit. Would always try to avoid using it if possible. We then have your Levy Hoplites, which are basically in the same boat, except they have the Phalanx ability. However, these guys come from your tier 3 social class, which is your peasants. Which isn't terrible, but I still wouldn't use these guys a lot because you can use that population better, in my opinion. But it's up to you if you really want to use them or not. You then have Light Hoplites, which come from your tier 2 social class, your Katoikoi or warriors. So be very careful when you use these guys. They can be helpful. I recognize that now. I know I've crapped on Light Hoplites a lot. But they can be helpful in supporting your cavalry, but so can javelinmen, and so can other spearmen. So in my opinion, they're still not vital to your armies, but they can be helpful. That's as far as I'll go with the Light Hoplites. To you Light Hoplite lovers out there, that's the closest I'll go to saying that they're good. I'll say that they're helpful in certain situations. They can be helpful anyway. But anyway, we then have the Colchian Hoplites. Very mid-tier hoplite unit. Looks just absolutely amazing. Look at all that armor and culture coming out from it. We're seeing a lot of blends of culture here. A lot of Colchian influence. Even some Dacian kind of looking helmets here, possibly. Like these big rams on top. Look at that. That looks badass, man. Well, that's more nomadic, I guess. But then we have the big Greek outfits as well. The shields, the spears. These guys are ready to rock. But they're just a mid-tier hoplite. They're not very elite, despite them looking so heavily armored. Their armor is at 25. So it can form a main battle line for you if you can afford the population, which is a very big if when you're playing as Colchis. But if you can be a decent frontline unit for you. But then after then, we jump up to your Colchian foot guards. Now these guys are in the elite tier category of hoplites. Very helpful, very useful. Still only 200 men in a unit though. And they have great stats, but I'm not going to read them all. It's just they're an elite tier hoplite unit. That's all you need to know, really. Nothing special about them per se, besides the fact that they are elite tier and they can help you out when possible or where appropriate. However, you have even a higher tier elite hoplite unit than these guys, at least kind of. You have the Greek elite hoplites, and so if we go back and forth, we can see the Greek elite hoplites have better armor at 41, but the morale is at 49, whereas the foot guards have 35 armor, so 7 armor difference, but they also have 52 morale compared to 49. And oh no, it's not a 7 armor difference, it's just a 6. But still, 6 armor, I would rather have the armor, to be honest, with the Greek elite hoplites, so I would go for them and recommend them over it. But again, we're not really seeing anything special, no armor piercing or anything. They're just a very, very good elite tier hoplite. Pretty close to being in some of the better tiers of hoplites, but even then, the morale being only at 49, most elite tier hoplites will have a minimum of like 52 morale and up. So these guys are actually kind of behind when you compare them to the rest of the Greek world, but either way, you still have a lot of variety in your hoplites, so that's good if you want to use those types of armies. But then moving on, we have your Thorax Spearmen, 200 men strong. Thorax Spears are as what they are. Thorax Spears, very heavily armored, very useful spear unit. Can really win you decisive cavalry engagements. However, you will note that I have not listed a Thurio Spearman unit. I'm not sure why that is. I don't think I've missed it. But it wasn't available to me in the custom battle screen, and I did not see it listed in any barracks. So, from what I understand, you do not have any Thurio Spearmen. It might be adjusted in the future, because you do have Thurio Swordsmen. So I would imagine you use a Thurios Spear unit, and perhaps it just wasn't added in, it's an oversight, or it's not added because you do have a lot of spear options anyway. You don't really need a Thurio Spear unit. But I thought I would just point that out, that as far as I could tell, you don't have any at all. And these guys, of course, do have the square, the hollow square ability and defensive formation, so that's nice. But then we come to your last spear unit, the Chalybes Pikemen. Now these guys, I don't think that they use a standard Sarissa. No, they don't. They're using a pike spear, but it's not as long as the Macedonian Sarissa. So if you do want to use pikes in your armies, you can try. But these guys, if they're going up against like even just a generic standard medium tier pikeman unit, they should get beaten. They also do not have any shields, besides your officer and that, but that doesn't count. But yeah, they don't really have any shields, so their melee defense is abysmal at only 5. And their armor is at 25, which isn't terrible, but it's still not that great. These guys can get slaughtered by enemy skirmisher fire. Obviously, they can also get outflanked quite easily because they're a pikeman unit. And yeah, they will get beaten by other pikes. So this unit is basically useful for when you're fighting factions that don't have pikes. You might want to use it against the nomads if you can avoid the skirmishers. Or like the Greek city-states like Athens who don't really use them. Yeah, just try to consider when you use this unit. I wouldn't use it in all of my armies, that is for sure. But that is your spearmen. Very heavily Greek influenced despite no Thurio spears. And you are very hoplite kind of focused with only that one little pikeman unit as an option, but it's not even a very good option. So just something to keep in mind. But anyway, that's it for your spears. Let's move on to your melee infantry now. So for your melee infantry, we start off with Greek infantry. Very low tier levy kind of unit for you. It's basically rounding up the men of a village, giving them a sword and shield and telling them to run in a certain direction. Really recommend you try to avoid using these guys unless you just need someone to go and die. These guys will do that for you, but they'll also waste 300 men out of your very limited population. So you might want to be careful. And I think, I'm not 100%, but I think they might even come from your tier 2 social class. Perhaps? I'm not sure off the top of my head actually, but if they did, that would be horrible. And I would never use them, but either way, just not a very good unit. After that, though, we then have the Georgian swordsmen. Now this unit actually does for certain come from your tier 2 social class, which is a little concerning because it really is not that good. Has a high melee attack of 12, but its defense is abysmal at 4. Most of that coming from its tiny shield. Besides that, it doesn't have anything impressive. Its armor is bad at 15, base morale is only 39. No bonus versus infantry, cavalry, elephants. Weapon damage is only 25 in total. These guys are really not that great. The one nice thing that they have is a javelin, and you have 300 men. So that's a lot of javelins coming at you. But after they throw them, they're not going to get a lot of kills, and they'll die very quickly in an extended melee. So try to use them to rear charge the enemy, or just basically soften an enemy line before you charge in with like more of your prized troops. But again, these guys come from your warrior social class, so you might not want to do that. You might just want to avoid using them entirely, to be honest. It depends on what kind of armies you want to use, but yeah, a little bit disappointing how bad those Georgian swordsmen are, assuming the UI is correct, but I have to go ahead assuming it is. I can't like dig into the files for every single unit and check out all of their stats. But after that, we then jump up to a more useful unit, your Thurio swordsmen. Thurio swordsmen are one of those units that I have started to become to appreciate. If you look back at my earlier faction overviews, for a lot of the factions, in my opinion, they didn't really have much point in being there. But now, with their stats being slightly changed, and especially for Colchis, so these guys are very fitting, and they're going to be very, very useful for you. You'll be relying on them pretty heavily to form a main battle line for you, in my opinion, but it won't be a long-lasting battle line because you only have 15 armor. The defense is great at 14, attack is okay at 9, but that armor is really going to get them killed quite quickly when they're going up against other mid-tier battle lines or against skirmisher heavy factions. Their big shield will help, but you got to be careful. So I would actually recommend using this unit if you can afford the population, which is again is another big if. After that though, we start to jump up to your more elite tier stuff. Here we have your Chalib swordsmen. These guys are not elite, but they are good. They're a very solid mid-tier swordsman unit for you. Not really lacking in any area. They have a good armor of 25, a good attack of 11, a good defense of 9. They even have some armor piercing at 7, getting a total weapon damage of 30. They have bonus versus elephants, cavalry, and infantry, although it's mainly against elephants, but still. Just a very versatile swordsman unit. Definitely a unit you're going to be wanting to try and use. And they also have a javelin, so that's certainly very helpful. And wow, man, love how good these guys are looking. Very cool shields, uniforms, all of that, and the helmets too. Woo. So some thick helmets. Very nice unit. This is probably the first unit that we've seen so far, and we're like, yeah, I would really try and use that unit quite a lot. I think it's really cool, especially for just a mid-tier solid swordsman. But after that, we jump way up, and we jump all the way to your Thorax swordsmen. Thorax are, of course, basically a Thurio swordsman unit on steroids, and they just have better equipment across the board, better attack, better basically everything, except they are not as fast, and they don't have as good of a charge bonus, but that's okay. They're still doing well in other departments. Only weapon damage of 26 though, compared to 30 for the other unit. These guys do not have any armor piercing really. So yeah, it's up to you if you want the heavy armor. It's an armor of 38 compared to an armor of 25. I would still probably go with the cheaper unit, the Chalib swordsman, which should be cheaper anyway. Just because they're quite versatile, they're fast, and they still have a javelin. So yeah, it depends what you want it for. If you want a long-lasting unit, use the Thorax swordsman. But anyway, we still have more swordsmen, but I've kind of moved them off to their own tier. So we'll get to those in a second. But first up, ready for orders. We have your Colchian Corsair Axeman. This is your first dedicated axe unit we've found. Does have a javelin, so that's nice. All of its stats are basically pushing it to being towards a solid mid-tier unit for you. Its main lacking area is armor at only 20. And its melee attack is only at 9, which is a little bit of a letdown considering it's an Axeman unit, but it has a good defensive term. Great charge bonus at 28, which is very nice, and good weapon damage totaling at 33. So that's quite powerful. Definitely try to get them to rear charge the enemy and they will do very nice things for you. But it is just a mid-tier Axeman unit. But I separated these two units because you have the Armazi heavy infantry. Now these guys are technically a swordsman unit, but they also seem to be serving as an axe unit because their armor piercing is massive. They have an armor piercing of 16 plus a regular weapon damage of 17. This takes us all the way up to a weapon damage of 33 plus a melee attack of 11, defense of 12, charge bonus of 24, and an armor of 38, sorry. This unit is the best of the best when it comes to your melee infantry units. Very solid unit. However, you won't be getting it until later in the game, probably, because you do have to upgrade your barracks a lot to get it. Also, the Cartley faction gets access to these guys, and I think they're actually a Cartley unit. But because they're so close, you do get access to them. But the Cartley AI will pump out armies just full of these guys, and so fighting the Cartley is going to be really hard, basically entirely due to this unit being so difficult to fight. So be careful of that. It is a very nice unit to have, but it's a very bad unit to fight up against because it will destroy a lot of your heavily armored units. But that's all of your infantry. We actually got through that part pretty quickly, I'm surprised. We have a couple segments of cavalry to cover and then run to the verdict. So let's get into your skirmisher cav. First up, we have your Colchian scout cavalry. Very fast with a good solid speed of 8. However, they're not very good in terms of a melee engagement, except for one thing. Despite them only having a melee attack of 8, they do also have armor-piercing weapons, getting a total weapon damage to 30, because their armor-piercing is at 12, which is very high indeed. So you could use them as like a little kind of assault force when you're assaulting a city, dismount them off their horses, and have them go in from the side, attack heavily armored units in the rear. And they could be very helpful if you do it that way. But yeah, besides that, not a great unit, but it's definitely going to be useful. And it does have 120 men, so that's nice. As do all of your cavalry units except one, actually. So that's nice for your cav. Gives you a little bit of an advantage over the western factions. And then we have the Cartvelian light horse skirmishers. Basically an upgrade in almost every single way compared to the Colchian scout cav, except they don't have the armor piercing damage of them, but they have a little bit better range, better attack, defense, and they do not have better armor. Their armor is only at 4, so they're definitely lacking in that department, but they have some shields, which gives you melee defense of 8, and the shield value is only at 2 actually, so that's pretty terrible, so never mind. But they are an upgrade pretty much across the board. Besides armor and the armor piercing. But after that, we then have the Colchian medium cavalry. These guys are basically like a high tier kind of Furios cav unit. Very solid. You can see that like kind of Greek cuirass happening here. So you can see that they're supposed to be kind of like a Furios cav unit for you, except even possibly more high tier. And I say that because you have good stats across the whole board, good charge, good armor 28, but you also have the armor piercing making its way back. For a lot of your units that have the Colchian word itself in the title, that generally means that they will have good armor piercing, in case you haven't caught on to that yet. So for this unit, armor piercing damage at 12 and a weapon damage at 19, giving you 31 total damage. That is very nice to have. Very good unit. I would definitely try and use this unit over your other two because it's just as fast, but it's better equipment, better training, just better everything. So this is your best skirmisher cav unit. However, now we have 3 more units, and then that is it for your cavalry. We are almost done. So first up, we have your heavy lancer cavalry. That means that they are a short cav because they just use their long lance and then they have to swap to a sword. So these guys are not very good in a melee defense situation because they only have 5 melee defense. So you want to charge them in, pull them out, charge them back in, pull them out, and keep doing that over and over and over and over and over. Do not let them get stuck in a melee engagement. I have a couple online battles that I have released or will be releasing by the time you see this overview where I'm fighting against heavy lancers and I take advantage of the fact that my opponents get them stuck in a long engagement because they die very easily when they do. and so they don't get their money's worth from that. But anyway, it's a great shock cav unit, but that's all it is. It's only shock cav, not melee. You really need to understand that if you're going to use it. We then jump up to the Cart Valiant Lesser Noble Cavalry. Now these guys are still shock focused. They have a large lance. However, their melee defense is up to 8, so these guys can stay in a melee engagement if you like. Armor 41 means that they'll survive for a while as well. No real armor piercing damage really though. I mean, all of their stats are decent, getting you into like the higher tier category of cavalry, but again, that melee defense of 8, while it's not massive, it's better than before. So you can let them get stuck in a melee engagement for a while, but just be wary of what engagements you do allow, because it's not like your general. Your general, remember, has 15 melee defense, which is almost twice as much, which is insane. That's such a powerful unit, the Colchis bodyguard cav. But anyway, that's that unit. Moving on to your last cavalry unit we have to discuss, which is your Cart Valiant Cataphracts. Now look at these guys, they are absolutely savage. This is obviously going to be a late game unit for you, but if you can use them, you should use them. They are excellent. Only just barely beaten by your general's bodyguard, and even then it's kind of debatable. It depends on what kind of use you want from them. But they have that melee attack of 11, defense of 10, charge bonus of 62, getting into Eastern, Parthian, and Median territory. And they have armor piercing of 12 plus the weapon damage of 19, so that's very nice. Total of 31 weapon damage. Bonus versus infantry, armor of 51. These guys are cataphracts in every sense of the word. They still will get beaten by elite Parthian and Persian cavalry, but that's like a one-on-one engagement, which is pretty rare to happen in a grand campaign situation. These guys are just savage. They're very, very useful. If you can get them in an online battle, just get like one for your army composition and they'll do wonders for you. Very powerful unit. Plus, you also have your general's bodyguard unit we've already talked about. Not as well armored, but it's still incredibly versatile and cheaper than your cataphracts. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for your military roster. As you can see, you have a fair bit of variety, but nothing that really stands out. For example, like Macedon, pikes and pelters stand out. Rome, legionaries, Carthage, elephants, and it's like variety of mercenaries. Colchis doesn't seem to have anything that's going to be super professional and kind of wing you constant, consistent battles. Your cavalry can get you there, but so can the cavalry of almost every single faction around you, so you're nothing special in that department. Your melee troops, they're decent, but again, your population is going to be such a big issue for you early on, even into the mid and possibly late game of your grand campaign run-throughs. Your spearmen, they're not really going to wing you all that many awards. Your hoplites are nice to have, but you get beaten by the Diadochi who use pikes all the time, and they are basically right next to you. Your skirmishers, you have a decent variety, but none that are really good at wingy battles, man. I mean, it really just depends on you being a very good general and using all of these tools that you have at your disposal to try and win your battles. And I can see that this faction is going to be really reliant on basically outsmarting the enemy. But you can do that pretty easily if you're going up against just the AI, but even then, factions like the Cartley will give you a run for your money despite you having such a large roster. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next section, but for now, we'll call it there and we'll go on to the part 3 section of this video where we'll talk about the verdict of Colchis. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, here we are at the verdict section of this video where we'll talk about some final thoughts and the overall difficulty of Colchis in my own opinion. So first off, your early game is going to be difficult and very rocky. You can get knocked out very easily. You're in a weak position in a bad city that you have it on turn 1, and you are surrounded by factions that generally will outclass you early on and recruit massive armies very, very quickly, especially in higher difficulties. So because of that, you're going to be very reliant on AOR and mercenary units to help fill your roster and give you those really high killing numbers that you need. You're going to need a lot of axemen. You're going to need some good cavalry, and I would really try to look for one of those superpower kind of units. For example, Syrian elephants down in Syria, they would be amazing for you, and they would really help you win battles. Maybe even getting some pikemen from the Macedonian area of play would be a nice big upgrade for you as well. But generally, your armies will be lacking professionalism and elitism, so you really need to try and find those really high tier AOR merc units that will help push your army to be rivaling all of those really good factions around you, and the big juggernaut factions that will rise and come and cause you big issues, such as Parthia, Bactria, and the Seleucids. Moving on from that, you are surrounded by factions that will probably be declaring war on you, unless you can really manipulate them with money. So you need to be pretty cunning with your diplomacy, and you need to try and get some kind of cultural group allied to you. I recommend you try and ally yourself with all of the nomadic factions, because you already have trade with them. At least you will once the new Grand Campaign submod is actually added into the base game. Plus, you'll be fighting all of their enemies anyway, so try and ally yourself with the nomads and let their all cavalry armies help you defeat your enemies, and they will also help you out with rebellions, which is very nice to have all cav armies ready to do that. So that'll be very good for you if you can get their love and friendship though, so you might need to buy it. My next point is that if you're doing the Grand Campaign and you're not in a head-to-head, you really need to get a new capital. Your capital really sucks. The only decent thing about it is that it's on the coastline, so you get trade with anyone pretty easily. However, that also means that you're open to naval invasions. So I would really try to focus on taking the Bosporan region from the Bosporan Kingdom, take over their capital, and set that as your own, because that would be super powerful for you, and it'll be a very stable and solid position in which you can launch out naval and land attacks in any direction you like, really. And then my final point, which is possibly a little debatable, but I think it's worth mentioning, is that the majority of factions around you and the factions that you'll encounter have better rosters and armies than what you do. You will find like a few kind of single city-state like factions that won't have good armies like you, but it will be kind of not as common. It will be like every now and then you'll fight a faction and their units are just a tier below yours in pretty much every way. But for the majority of your campaign, you're really gonna have to plan out your armies, really think about what your units can do that the enemy can't. And unfortunately, there won't be many times where you'll be outclassing them on a one-to-one basis. So you need to either have a lot of men, or you need to outflank them and outsmart the AI, which isn't the hardest thing to do, like I've said a few times before. But if you're not doing it, and if you're being lazy with your battles and campaigns, then it can cost you the entire campaign very, very quickly, especially with your lack of population, which is such a big hindrance for you. And that brings us to our difficulty rating, which in my opinion, drumroll please, this gets us to a solid 7 out of 10. This is still a hard difficulty rating. In my opinion, Colchis is a hard campaign. You're in a very difficult position. You can make it easier, basically around an average difficulty if you go and take over the Bosporan Kingdom. But even then, fighting the Bosporans won't be easy. They still have better units than you. They have a lot of Scythian units as well that will outclass some of your early tier units. So you really got to be careful on how you approach it and your timing on when you assault their cities and when you assault their armies and whatnot. But overall, Colchis gets a 7 out of 10 in my opinion. The overhaul that they received in the 1.2 in the 1.2.8 update was really nice, and it helped them bring more life and immersion into them. But they're still just Colchis. They're not a powerful faction. They never will be, and they're not supposed to be. But if you're trying to use them a lot in online battles, good luck with that. And if you're trying to do really well with them in a grand campaign, you can really struggle if you get unlucky. And just even if you don't get unlucky, your early game is going to be a struggle. So in my opinion, they're a solid 7 out of 10. They're a little bit harder, classifying as a hard difficulty. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for the 1.2.8 factions that have been overhauled. I will now be covering some of the Arabian factions and the Africans, and then we'll also be going on to the Ptolemies as well. So we have some exciting faction overviews coming up. Make sure you subscribe to stick around and make sure you don't miss those. Or you could also join our Discord down below. There is always a link in all of my descriptions if you want to get involved there. That way you can see what content is coming up very soon, and you won't miss out when we actually release videos, and you get notifications directly from there. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I shall see you in the next one.